Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So today I'm going to do another video out of this book, World's Greatest Letters. And today's going to be one by an abolitionist that was fairly famous. For those that don't know what an abolitionist is, that was someone who fought slavery during the days of slavery. And this gentleman's name is John Brown. So the letter here is specifically relevant because he was put to death because of a fight where he killed some folks to defend slaves and defend part of what was the Underground Railroad. If you're not familiar with what that is, the Underground Railroad was a way from slaves to get from the South to the North. And slavery is one of the most confused subjects there is, but if you study anything in history, not just American history, but human history, all tribes had slaves up until recent history. Okay, so recent being the last 150 years. So typically tribes had slaves that were members of other tribes local to them. So most slaves were owned by people that looked just like themselves, okay? So people like sometimes in history to put romantic notions that the whites and the blacks in this country, in America, were the first slaves there are. Anybody that lives anywhere else in the world knows about their histories and about those subject lines. But if you go back to ancient history in the United States, as far back as it's documented, slaves were some of the things that people were most proud of because they were possessions, is the way it was looked at. So you had native tribes that captured members of other native tribes. Typically, the women were assimilated, the children were assimilated, and the men were scalped and killed, or they were sacrificed to some god or some deity. The Aztec and the Inca had very public walls of how they would capture and take on other tribes and have those slaves and do that. The ancient tribes of Africa did the same thing, very similar across all Aboriginal type tribes in the world, including the Aboriginals in Australia, one of the oldest lands on the earth. This is documented around the world. So slavery in America has gotten a little contorted where people think that a certain set of people were the only people who were ever slaves. That wasn't the case. And when you go into the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln signed, so Lincoln wrote that. I saw a video one time where the young lady was so confused on who did what. And she said that, Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King was the one that freed the slaves. Which he came far, far later, which just shows how bad some of the educational situations are in the States right now when people don't know what happened centuries or decades behind something else. So to dive into that, President Lincoln penned the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War. And the Civil War, even though it was not fought about slavery, slavery was one of the biggest pieces that it was fought about. And the Emancipation Proclamation did not free all the slaves. Okay, it just freed the slaves in the southern states. Up in the northern states, you had people that were called indentured servants. It didn't do anything to help those people. The majority of indentured servants were white. A lot of them came from Ireland, and a lot of them came from Scotland, and some of them were prisoners from elsewhere in the world. So what would happen was they'd flee their countries and come here, or they'd come here for a better life, and in that they got tricked into indentured servitude, which they had to pay off their debt to travel to America, and that's how those people were enslaved. So at the time when the Emancipation Proclamation was written, you did have more slaves in the South that were black, that were from Africa specifically, but you had a lot that were also from other countries across the South, and the North was just as bad with those indentured servants and some slaves in northern states. So just to get that out of the way, it came to the point that everyone figured out that slavery was wrong. Okay, so the first to do it were the European nations. They stopped it, and then as European nations conquered Africa and traveled through there with colonies, they made slavery illegal in Africa. And some of the tribes there, specifically the Zulu, had a big problem with that. And there were plenty of movies made about that. There was one where the Britons fought the Zulu. That was Michael Caine's first movie, and you can actually see there the initial scenes in the movie. They were capturing another tribe where they were taking them as slaves. And then, as these British were there to cultivate Africa, they ran into these Zulu, and they fought with Martini Henry rifles against the Zulu spear. That Zulu spear and shield were one of the most, I guess, largest leaps forward in African warfare. It was kind of like the gladius that came along in Rome. It was just a weapon of mass destruction, basically. People couldn't fight against that short spear and that long shield, because in Africa at the time they were using long spears. I've gotten way off of subject here, though, so let's get back to the point. Today's letter is coming from this book, World's Greatest Letters, and it's from an abolitionist named John Brown, who was being put to death. Okay, so he was captured, and he was pretty fanatical in his devotion to abolition and the abolitionist movement, which he should be. Slavery was wrong, and it should have been ended, and he was one of those people right at the turn of that tide, and which was the biggest risk, right? So here's what this letter's about. John Brown is bidding farewell to his family the night before he's getting executed. He is in Charlestown Prison in Jefferson County, Virginia, and this is the 30th of November, 1859. Okay, 1859. So the Civil War hadn't broken out yet. He did this a little before the Civil War, and some of these things led up to some rallying cries that became Civil War specific. So John Brown's fanatical devotion to the abolitionist cause before the Civil War is an epic chapter in American history. Ever since he had gone to Kansas in 1855 to live with 5 of his 20 sons, good Lord, 20 sons, he had led a series of messianic raids on the pro-slavery forces and had clashed with state officials and soldiers in a series of bloody massacres, and had become an object of relentless manhunt for those massacres. Finally, the Virginia authorities captured him at Harper's Ferry in 1859 and sentenced him to death. Harper's Ferry was a quarrel that they had, and you can look up that in history books. It's a pretty specific bout. He said, "I submit to arrest, knowing full well that I shall be hanged for this attempts to end the evils of slavery. But after I am dead, the evil will remain, and you all and all the other patriots will come to learn that it can be purged, it can be purged from this guilty world only with blood." Brown asked a commanding general for permission to spend his last night on earth with his wife. The request was not granted. According to the Brown's biographer, Oswald Garrison Villard, it was the only time in all of his imprisonment that he gave way to anger or passion. But when the parting came, both husband and wife exhibited a composure either feigned or real that was truly surprising. With his wife gone, John Brown devoted himself to his last letter, to a brief but calm sleep. And here is the farewell letter that he wrote to his family on November 30th, 1859. "My dearly beloved wife, sons, and daughters, everyone, as I now begin what is probably the last letter I shall ever write to any of you, I conclude to write you all at the same time. I am waiting the hour of my public murder with great composure of mind and cheerfulness, feeling that the strongest assurance that in no other possible way could I be used to so much advance the cause of God and of humanity, and that nothing that either I or all of my family have sacrificed or suffered will be lost. The reflection that a wise and merciful as well as a just and holy God rules not only the affairs of this world, but of all worlds, and is a rock to set our feet upon under all circumstances, even those more severely trying ones, in which our own follies and wrongs have placed us. I have now no doubt but that only seeming disaster will ultimately result in the most glorious success. So, my dear shattered and broken family, be of good cheer, and believe and trust in God, with all your heart and with all your soul, for he doeth all things well. Do not feel ashamed on my account, nor for one moment despair of the cause, or grow weary of well-doing. I bless God, I never felt stronger in confidence, in certain and near approach of a bright morning and a glorious day, than I have felt, and I do feel now, since my confinement here. I am endeavoring to return like a poor prodigal as I am to my Father, whom I've always sinned, in the hope that he may kindly, forgivingly meet me through a very great way off. My dear wife and children, would to God you could know how I've been traveling in birth for you all, that no one of you, not one of you, may fail the grace of God through Jesus Christ, that none of you will be blind in the truth or to the truth and glorious light of his word, in which life, immortality are brought to light. I beseech you, everyone, to make the Bible your daily and nightly study, with childlike, honest, candid, teachable spirit, out of love and respect for your husband and father. And I beseech the God of my fathers to open all of your eyes to a discovery of the truth. You cannot imagine how much you may have soon need the consolations of the Christian religion. Circumstances like my own, for more than a month past, convinced me beyond all doubt of our great need of something more to rest our hopes on than merely our own vague theories framed up while our prejudices are excited, or our vanity worked up to its highest pitch. Oh, do not trust your eternal all up in the boisterous ocean without even helm or compass to aid you in steering. I do not ask any of you to throw away your reason. I only ask you to make a candid, sober use of your reason. My dear younger children, will you listen to the last poor admonition of one who can only love you? Oh, be determined at once to give your whole hearts to God, and let nothing shake or alter that resolution. You need to have no fear of regretting it. Do not be vain and thoughtless, but sober-minded, and let me entreat you all with love, the whole remnant of our once great family, with a pure heart fervently. Try to build again your broken walls and make the utmost of every stone that is left. Nothing can so tend to make a life a blessing than the conscientious note that you love and are beloved, and love ye the stranger still. It is ground of the utmost comfort in my mind to know that so many of you as I have had the opportunity to have given proof of your fidelity to the great family of man. Be faithful until death. From the exercise of habitual love to man, it cannot be very hard. To learn to love his Maker, I must yet insert a reason for my firm belief in divine inspiration of the Bible. Notwithstanding, I am, perhaps naturally, a skeptical, certainly not credulous. I wish you all consider it most thoroughly when you read the blessed book, and see wherever you cannot discover such evidence yourselves. It is the purity of heart, feeling, and motive, as well as the word and action which everywhere insisted on, that distinguish it from all other teachings, that commends it to my conscience, whether my heart willing and obedient or not. The inducements that it holds are another reason for convocation in truth and genuineness. I cannot here omit that this is my last argument for the Bible. Eternal life is that my soul is panting after at this moment. I mention this as season for endeavoring to leave a valuable copy of the Bible to be carefully preserved in remembrance of me, to so many of my posterity, instead of some other things of equal cost. I beseech you all to live in habitual contentment with moderate circumstances and gains of worldly store, and most earnestly to teach you this to your children and children's children after you, by example as well as precept. Be determined to know by experience, as soon as may be, whether Bible instruction is of divine origin or not, which says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another." John Rogers wrote this to his children. Abhor the errant whore of Rome. John Brown writes to his children to abhor with undying hatred, also that some all villanies, or the sum of all villainies, slavery. Remember, this is what he's dying for. He fought against slavery and he attacked different situations where slaves were being held or being sold. And this is his last few stanzas in his what looks to be a 3-page letter. Remember that he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he taketh the city. Remember also that they that be wise shall shine, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars are forever and ever. And now, my dearly beloved, farewell. To God, to the word of his grace, I commend you all. Your affectionate husband and father, John Brown. To the bitter end, John Brown fought the good fight. He was faithful unto death. Within a year and a half after his execution, the Civil War began, and a nation was torn asunder before the abolitionist cause was finally vindicated. So it's like he said, that there was no way to get past that without the falling of blood. The situation with slavery, it's an ugly topic, but it's a historical topic. Okay? I think the biggest issue with slavery this day and time is that it's happening right now in our world more than ever. There are more children and women wrapped up into the sex slavery trade than at any point in human history. And as we continue to argue and go back and forth about things that happened hundreds of years ago, there are very real people living through very real circumstances right now. So, if you study history and you respect education and you respect time, you should understand that all we can affect is the present. The past is the past. The future is a question mark. So all we can do is affect the present. So if people really want to act and respond around the atrocities of slavery and how horrible it is, you need to take action today on stuff that's happening in modern times, right? Because that's where you can actually have an impact that matters. Trying to say you're owed something from historical slavery, understand every nation on the face of the earth, every human being you walk past on the street, every single one of them have ancestors that were slaves. There's not a single human being on this planet that does not have ancestors that was slaves, okay? We all went through some part of that historically in our bloodlines as a time and place of being. So the modern arguments and the modern lack of education and the modern lack of specific knowledge, it's kind of embarrassing. And in America, we talk about some of these things very stupidly. The rest of the world, though, knows the history and they watch us and how we're acting like there's relevance today around one segment of slaves versus others, okay? So even on this continent, before any Europeans landed, there were slaves. And the modern people that don't know the history, you're embarrassing yourselves in some of the context of where these things are going. Also, to speak to the white privilege thing, this goes to show whites and blacks fought hand to hand to end slavery, just like whites and blacks and every other creed and credo fight for everything else that's bad in the world these days and try to defend good from evil. And that's the point of this. This man did what he could in his time when it was not popular and he was pretty much alone. Okay, and he did this in Virginia, which is his home. I mean, he lived there, and he was captured and hung. So it's something to think about. History's pretty cool. I've enjoyed this book of letters. I bought this a few months ago, and as I was reading it, I was like, wow, these things are definitely historically relevant. And it's written in a way, even though that was very long, it was kind of hard to read because it's written in Old English. What that means is there are letters missing. So when you read a word, you have to kind of look at it twice because there'll be letters missing in the word. Because Old English was more about how the word sounded than how it was specifically spelled. So you would leave out a letter to, if you really want a good education on that, though, look at the Bible from 1617. That's a pretty cool document to try to read. It was the first translation of the King James Bible to the English language. Pretty cool stuff to watch. So if you like context like this and subjects like these, please like the channel. Please subscribe. Please share. I may do a few more videos out of this just because I enjoy the content, and hopefully you will too. I'm Ben. Be good.